Imagine a city that has stood right on the water for 1,500 years. Not on the bank of a river, but literally in the middle of a lagoon on wooden stilts driven into the silty bottom. Every fall and winter, the sea rises, flooding the streets, squares, and first floors of houses. People have long been accustomed to this, but today the water is rising higher and higher, and the world is asking the question, how much longer will Venice be able to hold on? And will the moment soon come when the city completely goes underwater? Subscribe. It will be interesting. Venice stands on 118 small islands, separated by a network of canals. It is located in the Adriatic Sea in the northeastern part of Italy, in a vast, shallow lagoon with an area of about 550 square kilometers. This lagoon is separated from the open sea by narrow strips of land, which are called lido. Through several passages in these strips, seawater freely enters and exits the lagoon, following the tides. The city began to be built in the 5th and 6th centuries of our era. Residents of the mainland part of Italy fled here from the invasions of barbarian tribes, Germans and Huns. The swampy islands seemed like a safe refuge because enemies simply could not reach the people without having boats and without knowing the shallow channels. Thus, fear and the need for survival turned a seemingly uninhabitable place into the cradle of one of the greatest cities in human history. The builders of Venice solved a task that at first seems impossible. They drove millions of wooden stilts into the soft, silty bottom of the lagoon, mainly from the trunks of alder and larch. These wood species have an amazing property. In conditions of constant presence underwater, without access to oxygen, they do not rot, but gradually turn into something similar to stone. Stone slabs were laid on top of the stilts, and buildings were already erected on them. Throughout several centuries, Venice was one of the richest and most influential powers in the world. It controlled the trade routes between Europe and the East. Its fleet dominated the Mediterranean, and merchants brought spices, silk, precious stones, and gold here. The magnificent palaces, churches, and squares that delight tourists today were built exactly in those years of prosperity and wealth when Venice could afford everything. The problem of flooding has always existed in Venice, from the very moment the city was founded. However, what used to be a rare inconvenience has over time turned into a constant threat. It is not only that the climate is changing and the sea level is rising. The city itself is gradually sinking down into the soft soil of the lagoon. This process is called subsidence, and it has always happened in Venice, but in the 20th century, it accelerated sharply. In the first half of the 20th century, industrial enterprises began to develop rapidly on the mainland near Venice. For the needs of the factories, groundwater was pumped out of the ground in huge quantities. This became one of the main reasons why the city began to settle significantly faster than before. According to scientists, during the 20th century alone, Venice sank by about 23 centimeters. When this was discovered, the pumping of water was banned and the subsidence slowed down, but did not stop completely. The main natural phenomenon from which Venice suffers is called acqua alta, which translated from Italian means high water. This is a special phenomenon when the water level in the lagoon rises above the mark of 80 centimeters above the average sea level. It is from this mark that water begins to flood the lowest parts of the city, especially the famous St. Mark's Square, which is located in one of the most vulnerable zones. Acqua alta occurs when several unfavorable circumstances coincide simultaneously. First, these are the tides, which are especially high during certain periods of the lunar cycle. Second, these are strong southerly and southeasterly winds that drive water from the Adriatic Sea directly into the lagoon. Third, it is low atmospheric pressure at which the water surface rises slightly higher than usual. When all three factors coincide, the water can rise very high. The most destructive flood in the history of Venice occurred in November 1966. The water level then rose almost 194 centimeters above normal. All of St. Mark's Square was underwater. The first floors of most houses were flooded. Priceless works of art, books, manuscripts, and household items were irrevocably destroyed or seriously damaged. This catastrophic event forced Italy and the whole world to take a new look at the problem of Venice. After the flood of 1966, the Italian government declared Venice a national treasure requiring protection. Long discussions began about exactly how to save the city. Scientists, engineers, politicians, and public figures argued for decades about possible solutions. Some proposed raising the entire embankment and the first floors of buildings. Others talked about mobile barriers at the entrances to the lagoon. Others insisted that the life of the city needed to be completely reconsidered. The frequency of floods in Venice has noticeably increased over recent decades. If at the beginning of the 20th century, acqua alta happened several times a year, by the end of the same century, this phenomenon began to occur dozens of times a year. In some years, the number of floods exceeded 100 cases in 12 months. Venetians are forced to keep special rubber boots and wooden walkways at home to move along flooded streets. The rise in sea level associated with climate change makes the situation even more alarming. Scientists have calculated that during the 20th century, the sea level in the Adriatic rose by about 12 centimeters. Forecasts for the future are even less encouraging. If greenhouse gas emissions do not decrease, by the end of the 21st century, the sea level may rise by another half meter or more. For Venice, which is already very low, even a few additional centimeters mean a sharp deterioration of the situation. In 1984, the Italian Parliament passed a special law on the protection of Venice. After years of research and debate, in 2003, construction finally began on a system of mobile barriers named MOSE. This word is an abbreviation for the Italian name, which can be translated as Experimental Electromechanical Module. In addition, this word is consonant with the name of the biblical prophet Moses, who, according to legend, parted the waters of the sea. The MOSE system is an engineering structure that had no equal in the world at the time construction began. It consists of 78 huge metal shields that, in an inactive state, lie on the bottom of the lagoon in special concrete boxes. These shields are located in 3 passages between the lagoon and the open sea, through which seawater enters Venice. When a threat of flooding arises, the shields rise and block these passages. Each of the metal shields of the MOSE system has impressive dimensions. The width of one shield is about 20 meters. The height, depending on the depth of the passage, is from 18 to 28 meters, and the thickness is about 4 meters. When the shield lies on the bottom, there is water inside it. To raise it, the water inside the shield is replaced with compressed air. Under the action of the air, the shield floats up, turning on a hinge, and stands vertically, forming a barrier for sea waves. The MOSE system protects 3 sea passages into the lagoon, at the island of Lido, at the island of Malamocco, and at the island of Chioggia. Each of these passages has its own characteristics, different width and depth, different nature of currents. Therefore, the shields in each passage have slightly different sizes and are arranged in several rows to form a reliable barrier even with strong sea waves. The construction of MOSE dragged on for many years and was accompanied by numerous scandals. It was originally planned to complete the work by 2011, but the deadlines were pushed back again and again. The cost of the project constantly grew and eventually exceeded 6 billion euros, which is significantly more than the original estimates. In addition, in 2014, a large-scale corruption scandal broke out. Several officials and contractors were arrested on charges of embezzlement of public funds. Despite all the delays and scandals, the MOSE system was finally put into operation. The first full-scale test took place in October 2020 during a severe flood. The shields rose and held back the water, while outside the lagoon, the sea level exceeded 130 centimeters. Inside the city, it remained at a quite tolerable level. This became a real celebration for the Venetians, who, for the first time in many years, saw real protection. Since then, the MOSE system has been used dozens of times. The shields are raised when forecasters predict a water rise above 110 centimeters. The decision to turn on the system is made in advance, usually 4 or 5 hours before the expected peak tide. During this time, the shields have time to rise, and ships in the lagoon have time to anchor or enter the port. Environmentalists and scientists have mixed feelings about the MOSE system. The main concern is that closed barriers disrupt the natural water exchange between the lagoon and the sea. The Venice lagoon is a unique ecosystem, home to hundreds of species of fish, birds, and other animals. When the shields are closed, the water in the lagoon is not renewed. If the barriers remain closed too often or for too long, the lagoon may begin to become polluted and its ecosystem may suffer. Venice faces another difficult problem. A huge number of tourists destroys it no worse than floods. Every year, from 20 to 25 million people come to the city, whereas less than 50,000 permanent residents remain here. Whereas in the 50s of the last century, there were almost 180,000 of them. Tourist flows, huge cruise ships that until recently entered right into the lagoon, created waves that destroyed the banks of canals and the foundations of houses. The subsidence of the soil under Venice continues today, although much more slowly than in the last century. The reason is not only the weight of the buildings themselves, but also geological processes in the earth crust. The soil in the lagoon consists of alternating layers of clay, sand, and silt. Under centuries of pressure from buildings and its own weight, these layers gradually compact, and the Earth's surface slowly but steadily sinks down. To understand the scale of the problem, it is enough to look at old photographs and compare them with what can be seen in Venice today. In the images of the beginning of the 20th century, the first steps of many buildings descending to the water are clearly visible above the surface. Today, these steps have completely gone underwater. According to various estimates, over the last century, Venice has sunk relative to sea level by about 30 centimeters, if taking into account both soil subsidence and water rise. Italian authorities and the city administration of Venice are taking other measures to protect the city, in addition to the MOSE system. In a number of areas, embankments and canal banks are being reinforced. Some squares were raised with the help of special filling. The first floors of many historic buildings are being waterproofed so that water does not penetrate into the walls and destroy foundations. All these are important measures, but they are all partial in nature and do not solve the problem as a whole. The weak points of the MOSE system are well known to specialists. First, the shields were created with a calculation for a maximum water rise of about 3 meters. If the sea level continues to grow, as some climatologists predict, this margin may turn out to be insufficient in just a few decades. Second, metal structures constantly in seawater are subject to corrosion and require constant maintenance. Keeping the MOSE system in working order is very expensive. According to available data, annual maintenance costs amount to tens of millions of euros. The hinges and mechanisms on which the shields are held work in difficult conditions. Seawater, mollusks, algae, and sea life constantly clog moving parts. In addition, metal in seawater rusts significantly faster than in air, and shields require regular inspection and repair. Some scientists wonder, does MOSE not make Venice a hostage to a false sense of security? If the city is protected from floods, its inhabitants and authorities may stop thinking about other protection measures and about the long-term future. Meanwhile, it is a long-term strategy that Venice needs most right now. No barriers will be able to hold back the sea forever if the water level rises and the city itself continues to settle. Another serious problem is related to what happens to the lagoon when the shields are closed. Modern shields are designed to hold water for several hours, a maximum of a day. But even such relatively short closures affect the ecosystem of the lagoon. Fish and other marine inhabitants are deprived of their usual migration routes. Pollutants that are normally carried out by the sea current begin to accumulate in the lagoon. The question of what will happen to Venice if nothing is done sounds rhetorical, but the answer to it is quite concrete. Without protection and without serious measures to combat subsidence and sea level rise, the city will be flooded more and more often and to an ever greater depth. Priceless works of art, frescoes, mosaics, sculptures will be destroyed under the influence of salt water. Living in such a city will become increasingly difficult, and the already decreasing population will continue to shrink. Historians and restorers are sounding the alarm. Salt water has already caused huge damage to the buildings of Venice. The salt that water leaves in the pores of brick and stone crystallizes and literally tears the material from the inside. This process is called salt weathering. Many ancient buildings have already suffered from it so much that their restoration requires colossal efforts and funds. Every new flood accelerates this destructive process. The most serious test for Venice in recent history was the flood in November 2019. The water level rose to almost 187 centimeters, which was the second largest flood in the entire history of observations. The MOSE system was not yet fully ready for operation then, and the city was defenseless. The famous St. Mark Basilica, in which water flooded the mosaic floors, was damaged. St. Mark Basilica, the main cathedral of Venice, has experienced floods repeatedly in its history. But it was the flood of 2019 that caused its special damage. The church is almost 1,000 years old. Its floors are laid with the finest mosaic of thousands of pieces of smalt and marble. Salt water penetrated under the mosaic tiles, washed away the mortar on which they were held, and caused bulging and destruction of the unique coating. Restoration will take many years. Not only the basilica, but also thousands of residential houses, small churches, workshops, and shops in Venice suffer losses with every serious flood. Owners of such buildings are forced to spend significant funds on protecting their property. Some install metal shields in doorways and special pumps, but all these measures rather reduce losses than eliminate the problem itself. Scientists from different countries are actively studying the situation with Venice because it is a kind of model for many coastal cities in the world. Bangkok, Jakarta, Shanghai, Rotterdam, Miami, New York, many other cities in the world also face the threat of flooding due to sea level rise and ground subsidence. How Italy handles the problem of Venice is being carefully studied all over the world to apply this experience in other places. One of the key lessons of Venice for other cities is that a technical solution in itself cannot solve the problem if it is not accompanied by a change in lifestyle and policy. It is possible to protect a city from the sea with mechanical barriers, but it is impossible to simultaneously allow it to settle, pollute the lagoon, allow unlimited tourism, and a decrease in the number of permanent residents. All these problems are interconnected, and they need to be solved together. In recent years, the city authorities of Venice have seriously taken up the regulation of tourism. Restrictions have been introduced on the entry of large cruise ships into the lagoon. A system of paid entry to the historic center of the city for one-day tourists is being discussed and partially implemented. The goal is to stop the turning of Venice into an attraction city where there is no place for real life, and to preserve it as a living settlement with permanent residents. The demographic situation in Venice causes no less concern than the threat of floods. Due to constant flooding, high housing prices, and the inconvenience of life in a city on the water, young people and families with children are leaving it first of all. Mostly elderly Venetians remain, who are held here by attachment to their native places as well as the tourism business. If the outflow of population doesn't stop, in a few decades, Venice may turn into an uninhabited open-air museum. There are also scientists who believe that Venice, in its current form, cannot be saved in the long term. In their opinion, in the most unfavorable development of events, by the end of the 21st or at the beginning of the 22nd century, a significant part of the city will be permanently underwater. Such forecasts seem catastrophic, but scientists insist that they need to be taken seriously and prepared for various scenarios. Other specialists are more optimistic. They point out that Venice has been going through crises, floods, epidemics, wars, political upheavals for many centuries, and every time it survived and was reborn. The MOSE system gives the city the time buffer necessary to develop and implement longer-term protection measures. Technologies do not stand still, and in the coming decades, new solutions may appear that we do not even suspect today. One of the promising directions is the technology of pumping water under the lagoon bottom. Italian scientists proposed an idea: if seawater is pumped under pressure under the soft ground of the lagoon, It can slow down or even stop the subsidence of the city. Small experiments conducted in the 2000s showed promising results. In those places where water was pumped, the ground surface rose by several centimeters. However, the full-scale application of this technology throughout the city still remains a matter of the future. Architectural adaptation of buildings to the conditions of a constant threat of flooding is also part of the city's survival strategy. Some homeowners are already moving electrical panels, heating boilers, and other important equipment from the first floors to the upper ones. The first floors of some buildings are deliberately left uninhabited or used for storage, knowing that they will be regularly flooded. This is not a victory over the sea, but a sensible adaptation to reality. The monitoring and early warning system in Venice is one of the best in the world. A special service called the Center for Tidewater Forecasting and Warning monitors the water level in the lagoon and in the sea around the clock. Forecasters analyze data on wind, pressure, and tides and issue forecasts for several days ahead. Water level sensors are installed throughout the city, and the warning system includes special sirens warning citizens of an impending flood. Venetians have developed a special culture of attitude towards water over the centuries. They do not perceive it only as a threat. It is also part of their identity, part of the special atmosphere of the city. Gondolas, longboats, boats, rowing races, sea festivals, all this is an integral part of city life. Even acqua alta is perceived by local residents with a certain amount of humor and calm. Put on boots, laid down walkways, and we live on. But this calm is increasingly difficult to maintain today. The international community provides significant support to Venice. The city is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, and this organization closely monitors its condition. Many foreign foundations, private companies, and governments allocate funds for the restoration of Venetian cultural monuments. French, American, German, and other organizations have been financing work on the preservation of frescoes, paintings, sculptures, and architectural monuments of the city for several decades. The discussion about the future of Venice does not subside among the Italians themselves either. Some believe that everything possible should be done to preserve the city in its current form, regardless of the costs. Others believe that the money invested in the protection of Venice is better spent on helping other Italian cities that also suffer from natural disasters, earthquakes, landslides, floods. Still others wonder, is it not easier to move the residents and the most important cultural values to the mainland? The idea of moving or evacuating Venice, of course, sounds absurd. It is impossible to move the Grand Canal, St. Mark's Square, the Basilica, palaces, bridges. All this forms a single ensemble, the value of which is precisely in the inseparable connection of architecture, water, history, and real life. Venice without Venetians, without fish markets, without glassblowers from Murano Island, without gondoliers, will turn into just a beautiful postcard and not into a living city. The production of the famous Venetian glass on Murano Island is an example of how traditional crafts fight for survival in conditions of a constant threat of floods and population outflow. Master glass blowers have been passing on their art from generation to generation for 8 centuries. But today, young people often prefer to leave for the mainland in search of a calmer and more predictable life. If the masters leave, a unique craft may disappear with them. The Venetian carnival mask and costume production lace making on Burano Island, the gondola trade. All these are living traditions that exist precisely because people live in the city. These traditions can be preserved only by preserving the city itself as a place for life and not only for tourism. In this sense, the fight against floods and the fight for the social revival of Venice are two sides of the same coin. Among the measures discussed to stimulate the return of people to Venice are tax breaks for families with children, subsidies for home restoration, the creation of new jobs not related to tourism. Some politicians propose introducing strict restrictions on the conversion of residential premises into short-term rentals for tourists, because it was this that largely pushed permanent residents out of the historic center. An important direction of work to save Venice is the restoration and reinforcement of the buildings themselves. Many houses in the city need urgent repair of foundations. The wooden stilts on which they stand, although surprisingly strong, are still not eternal. Some of them have been serving for 800, 900, and even more years. The condition of the stilts can only be checked with the help of special probes that are immersed in the ground near the building. If the stilts have become unusable, they are reinforced or replaced, which is an extremely difficult and expensive task. The problem of Venice also touches upon another important question. Who bears responsibility for the fate of high world heritage? Venice belongs to Italy, but its value belongs to all of humanity. This means that the responsibility for its preservation should, in the opinion of many experts, be distributed more widely. However, international treaties in this area are still far from obliging states to actually finance the protection of World Heritage Sites in other countries. Climate policy is directly linked to the fate of Venice. Every ton of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere accelerates the melting of glaciers and the rise of world ocean levels. This makes the future of Venice directly dependent on decisions made in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Delhi, and other world capitals. Inaction in the field of climate policy means that no technical protection will save the city if the sea level rises faster than expected. It is also important to understand that MOSE, no matter how well it works, is not an ultimate solution to the problem. The creators of the system and the Italian authorities themselves admit that at current rates of sea level rise and soil subsidence, the system will be able to protect Venice only until the middle, at best, until the end of the 21st century. After that, the barriers will turn out to be too low. This means that we need to think now about what will replace MOSE. Some experts suggest that during the next modernization of the system, the shields should be made higher so that they can hold back higher waves. Others say that a fundamentally different protection architecture is needed, not just barriers at the entrances to the lagoon, but a complex system of dams, pumps, and elevated platforms that would protect each individual island and block. This will require investments comparable to those already spent on MOSE, or perhaps even greater. Venice and the MOSE system attract the attention of engineers and environmentalists from all over the world, also because they provide a unique experience of interaction with a mobile, complex marine environment. Nowhere in the world before had anything similar been built in such conditions. A shallow lagoon with variable currents, high salt concentration, active marine life, historic buildings around. Every technical solution here had to be developed practically from scratch. and every problem provided new knowledge. Fishermen and residents of small islands located in the Venice lagoon treat MOSE differently. Some are happy with the protection from floods that drowned their houses too. Others complain that when the shields are closed, there is less fish in the lagoon and boats cannot freely go out to sea. Small fishing communities on the islands of Pellestrina and Chioggia live by their own laws, and their opinion is not always taken into account in large city and state decisions. Venice looks into the future with hope and concern at the same time. Hope is related to the fact that technologies and international support give the city a chance. Concern is related to the fact that threats, primarily climatic ones, are growing faster than decisions are made. But Venice has already gone through times when its end seemed inevitable, and every time there were people who did not agree with this sentence and looked for a way out. It is this human persistence and ingenuity that inspires the greatest optimism. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and share your opinion in the comments.